That Monday morning, 19th May, about 10 o'clock, we bid adieu to Boston. About 6 miles short of Belchertown, the stage driver took in a man who had a violin hung at his side. One of the passengers proposed that we should have a tune to amuse us. Our fiddler consented.
John May, her father, had been part of the Boston Tea Party. They were upper-class Bostonians. They were very well connected. Abigail's first cousin, born shortly after she died, who's given the name Abigail May in tribute to her, later became Mrs. Bronson Alcott, wife of one of the great thinkers of mid-19th century New England, and of course the mother and the father of Louisa May Alcott, the writer.
We arrived at Belchertown with good appetites for dinner, which, having satisfied, we set off for Northampton. Before 6, we were safely landed at Pomeroy's Tavern. Pomeroy's is the best house we have seen since Boston. We had an excellent supper. Our landlady entered into conversation. She asked what ailed my hand. I did not feel conversable, so barely said that I had lost the use of it by nervous affection. Wednesday morn I woke much refreshed, and at 7 left the pretty town of Northampton, pursuing our route through an excellent turnpike road over the mountains, and arrived at Pittsfield about sunset. Our host was Dr. Kittredge. He said he was positive he could entirely cure me, and offered to try if the waters failed.
Around 1800, the medical profession was very, very primitive, and the doctors tried anything. There were also people at the same time going around giving people electric shocks in very early attempts at shock treatment. There's a lot of different remedies that were used in those days, and people did not really understand how and why they worked or didn't work, including giving people heavy metals. So if somebody felt that they were improved by using mineral waters, that anecdotal evidence would be looked upon as being valuable.
Physicians certainly knew very little about the causes of diseases or the beneficial treatments. So they were fairly quick to seize upon mineral waters as a way of treating illness. And they actually, a number of them set up their medical practice in Ballston Spa or later in Saratoga Springs in order to take advantage of the water as a method of treating their own patients.
When people went to the place like the springs at Ballston or Saratoga, they spent a long time being there. It was a break. They rested, total relaxation, no particular worries of the world. And that's good for anybody's constitution. And then they're liable to have a great deal of benefit from just doing that.
Abigail May, we don't know what Abigail May's illness was, but she complained of spasms in her hand. If these were muscular, bathing her hand may have helped. If they were neurological, it probably did nothing at all.
We passed a comfortable night, and after breakfast rode 7 miles to Lebanon, where we alighted and viewed the springs.
Lebanon Springs, which is just an hour from here, went back well into the 1760s, just before Saratoga and Ballston were discovered. It was a fairly well-developed resort. It was also closer to Boston, a little closer to New York.
Our ride to Albany was not very pleasant, from the circumstance of having an unruly horse in the carriage. I thought nothing could equal the banks of the Connecticut River, but I now found the Hudson no way inferior. We felt a little uneasy crossing the ferry with such a mischievous animal, but he behaved himself pretty well, and we reached our quarters in Albany by 5 in the afternoon. Friday, we did not leave Albany till near 10 o'clock. We found our ride from Albany to Schenectady very pleasant. The road is sandy and heavy for the horses, but level and agreeable for the traveller. We had been on the road for half an hour when one of the passengers inquired if George had had the smallpox. On being answered in the negative, he said it was in Albany and that a negro boy had the symptoms at the house where we had lodged. You may judge how we felt at this information, but Mamma was not long in determining what was proper to be done. We dined at Goodman's Tavern in Schenectady, after which a doctor was called in and George inoculated without delay. Before sunset we arrived at Aldridge's, and here I will rest my cramped fingers.
And finding the letters was incredible because suddenly we knew something about the building when it was about 8 years old. And architectural and archaeological investigation couldn't have told us some of the things that Abigail May told us. It was from Abigail May that we learned that there was a 2-story veranda on the front of the building, and there was a veranda of some sort on the south side.
We have a very pleasant chamber, directly over that room occupied by Aunt Davenport last summer.
Abby described her first room as a rather large room, but she shared it. She shared it with others, and this was consistent with the general lack of privacy at that time period. When the new wing at the Aldridge Hotel was finally opened for use, she was afforded a room of her own.
There are great improvements making here. Mr. Aldridge has lengthened his dining room near 1/3, with a new kitchen at the end, and over the whole are 9 new lodging rooms, proper for gentlemen only. These, when completed, will enable Mr. Aldridge to entertain 100 people admirably. In time, this will be a most charming place.
In the year 1800, Ballston Spa, Ballston Springs, as it was often called at that time, was still, I think, a little bit in advance of Saratoga. It wasn't going to last very long.
Ballston Spa was very fortunate because it had a huge influx of cash, if you will, and investment in the early 1800s by Nicholas Lau. Lau was a financier, merchant in New York City. He was also a land speculator, and he actually ended up owning the spring.
Saratoga, in 1802, acquired a really grand hotel. Of course, Nicholas Lau followed 2 years afterward with the Sans Souci.
And by 1804, he had constructed the large Sans Souci Hotel, and all its outbuildings had encouraged merchants to come and tradespeople, and drew lots and lots of people into his spa in the Springs.
And the provision of what we would now consider a hotel, since the Aldrich House was more like an overgrown tavern, made something of a difference.
And that propelled Ballston Spa well beyond Saratoga Springs at the time, and Ballston Spa became the place to be. Unfortunately, most of the money made in Ballston Spa went down to New York City. He also was in control of the water and had water rents from people going down to New York City. Saratoga Springs, on the other hand, everything was local. All the ownership was local. The money made in Saratoga Springs stayed in Saratoga Springs and was invested and reinvested and turned around. That was not the case in Ballston Spa. So when the first economic downturn occurred in 1809, 1810, Saratoga Springs was able to weather the storm. Ballston Spa really wasn't. Also, Ballston Spa had something that Saratoga Springs did not have, and that was water power. And people found very quickly that they could make more money through industry propelled by the water power than they could through the resort trade. And that money, though, does not spread out through an economy like the resort money did in Saratoga Springs.
Saturday morn, we all tried the taste of the springs. We all make wry faces at the waters. I confess 'tis strange to me anyone can like them. I should as soon fall in love with a dose of salt and antinomy. However, I drink what they bid me.
Just to the north of the spring was the bathing green. And it was at this location where there would have been a bathhouse, and people would have bathed in the water. And the people, at least later on, and perhaps during the time prior to the development of the spa, had two choices. They could bathe in the water as it came out of the ground, or they could bathe in heated water. The heated water cost more. They also took the water by drinking it, and this was probably the preferred regimen.
I was astonished at the concourse of people that flocked in wagons, on horseback and on foot, to drink the waters. The seats round the spring were constantly filled. Wednesday, before 6, Mamma and myself were at the bathing house. I felt shockingly. The fear of my spasms made me almost sick, and I believe no criminal condemned to the pillory ever experienced such distress sensations. At last and at length I mustered courage, taking care to have laudanum handy, and was happy in finding no such effects from the shock as I had dreaded. I screamed merrily, so says Mar. I felt finely for 2 hours after bathing, when I was seized with distressing pains in my back, and made me very sober. I thought I perceived an unusual irritation in my nervous system. I had intended on going to bathe 3 mornings successively, but that is not now prudent.
This was a woman that I think probably fairly knew that her health was failing. She often tried to put the best face on it.
Sunday, I was called to go to the billiard room. A large party of us played 3 games. The ladies were said to play very well. They certainly appeared to great advantage. 'Tis a very graceful game. Our ladies really looked quite killing. The bell recalled us, after which we assembled in the long room.
We read in Abigail May that people found amusements, they created amusements in Ballston Spa.
And there were only a few things they could do for entertainment. They could sing, they could dance if people had musical instruments, and they usually brought musical instruments. They also would play cards, and they would play billiards. Generally billiards were available for the people.
Monday, June 3rd, I went to the spring this morning. On the bridge, I met old Frederick. He told me he had an execution against me for not going to bathe. I told him I could not go till Ma returned. This seemed to satisfy him, but he followed me to the spring. I drank my usual quantum, 1 large tumbler full. He said it was not enough, and forced me to take 2 more. However, I begin to grow very fond of the water. It has lost its disagreeable flavorality in great measure. When I first tasted them, I could distinguish 3 different impregnations, steel, salt, and sulphur, very plain, but are now quite pleasant to me. You would be astonished to see what those waters deposit on standing, though when taken from the spring they are perfectly transparent. This substance, whatever it is, must have some effect on the constitution taken in such large quantities. On drinking, my head is frequently dizzy, but an agreeable warmth seems to diffuse itself all over me, and my stomach is braced by every draught. If anything could give me faith, it would be to see with what zeal people round here flock to the spring. Be the complaint what it will. Last Friday, they brought in a man in a wagon who was so crazy they were obliged to tie him fast. He was put into the shower bath 10 times by force on Friday. Yesterday, he was here, but quite rational. So much so, he drank the water voluntarily and bathed his own head. There's Major Keyes in Saratoga Springs, who told me he came there about 4 weeks ago, with his crutches and so weak he could not ride above 10 miles a day. He now skips about without help and rides on horseback here and back again without fatigue. I have some thoughts of having one of the bathing tubs filled, and so take up my residence in it, to eat, drink, and sleep in spring water, and when it is warm, draw it off and fill it again.
If you're taking a bath in mineral water, there are gases being released by that water, and those gases, I've heard, take the place of the oxygen that you're supposed to be breathing, and you can become very, very limp and very, very relaxed upon finishing a bath, and that too can be, I suspect, beneficial for a body.
They certainly advised mineral water for the conditions that we believe today benefit from hydrotherapy. Diseases of the skin, certain digestive diseases. We read about bathing the eyes, and these were probably relatively effective treatments. When they had organic diseases that had no connection with the skin or the stomach, it's very likely that they were accomplishing little.
But when people came to the springs, they came not just for their health, but to get away from the routines of life, and they had to entertain themselves. They could take walks. One favorite place to walk was to the Lover's Leap, which was behind Brookside, over a cliff overlooking the Cadeross Creek. They could also walk up the hill directly behind Brookside, which later on became called Mohegan Hill.
In the afternoon, Miss Clark's, Mr. and Miss Rogers, Dr. Irving, Mr. Kane, and myself took a walk to the wigwam on the hill, and saw with astonishment the pains bestowed and labor required to make baskets. I thought it cruel ever to dispute price with the poor creatures. There were 3 squaws and a papoose, all of whose earthly goods could be put into a bushel. For straw, served them as beds, chairs, tables, and all. An iron pot containing some Indian dumplings and herrings was boiling over some coals at the door, and yet they appeared happy.
But who the people were that Abigail visited is a little bit more of a mystery. My guess is that they were Mohawk.
After a delightful ride of little more than an hour, we arrived at Saratoga, rested ourselves, and then proceeded to the rock spring. We all of us disliked the waters and gave a decided preference to those at Ballston. You would have laughed and pitied us. One bathed their head for the headache, another washed their face for St. Anthony's fire, some washed their hands for salt rheum, others their knee or ankle for rheumatism and gout, eyes, ears, noses, in short, each had an ale and applied accordingly. 15 weeks since I bid adieu to Boston. Hardly can I realize that such a period has elapsed. The events that took place in Ballston appear much like a dream. I have made some dear friends and hope benefited my health.